one of the strategies I used at my school was these topics here. We had 4 ability sets: set 1 higher, set 2 higher, set 3 used to do higher, but they would have done intermediate in the old days. They're very old days now, and they now do the new foundation, most of them, and set 4 foundation. We have half-year groups. There's 8 groups as such. I taught the set 3 for the first year of the GCSE, the first 2 years of the GCSE, and it was a critical group in the sense that none of them actually had a target grade. We're obviously looking at things like Fisher Aspire and different flight paths, but none of them actually had a target grade of a 6, which made things slightly easier in terms of the pressure. So that if they did get a 6 and ended up doing higher, some of them, then it's going to be value added. But I understand that some of you may have that type of kind of highest foundation class, if I can call it that, and their target grade is beyond a 5. So it makes it very difficult if you think their true ability is not really that. Anyway, these topics here, and there's probably a lot more: simultaneous equations, tree diagrams. We made the decision that rather than kind of cram them at the end, if we were going to change tier, we taught them to a kind of higher standard. If you think about it, they're old grade B topics. They kind of go up to 6, if you think about it. Like simultaneous equations, rather than just 2 equations sitting in the middle of the page crying out to be solved, I taught it to that group. Sometimes it was extension work for some of those students who I felt were doing rather well. Sometimes I did it with the whole class. The problem if you do things with the whole class and push it too high, almost beyond grade 5, you could lose a lot of the students. So it tended to be kind of differentiated work, extension work for those who I thought could cope with it, extra work. Anyway, simultaneous equations, rearranging them, looking at graphs, obviously not quadratics and linear. That's too much for this type of student. This type of student isn't good enough in a sense to go up to a higher tier group because they won't access a lot of the material and perhaps will lose confidence. Tree diagrams, yes, that one we pushed obviously to without replacement, and the at least 1 read by subtracting from 1. It lost a lot of them while we were teaching it, or while I was teaching it, but some of them could cope with it. And especially on a calculator paper, it made it a lot easier for them to be able to do that without their having to rely on too much fraction work, especially when those denominators change. But some of them could cope with that rather well. Maybe nearly half the group could take that on. Trigonometry, I pushed that a bit further with the angles of elevation, questions involving 2 triangles stuck together. So the hypotenuse of one is the adjacent of the other, and then you have to use those together to find the angle. Bearings questions, but no sine and cosine rule. The formulas aren't there anymore, so it's not an easy one to kind of teach and say, look up the formula. Quadratics, 2x squared, 3x squared, it lost a lot of them, but some of them could take it on. A difference of 2 squares even as an extension. Quadratic sequences, a very formulaic way of finding the nth term. That might be voted for later on if you choose the new topics for teaching and learning of that. Vectors, rather than just column vectors, I did a bit of A plus B across triangles, A minus B, looking at diagonals. There's a lovely My Maths kind of utility within that platform. There's other platforms obviously that offer it with a little ladybird that goes around shapes. It's really useful. There's also a really good worksheet that I made out of that from the basic maths revision and practice books, which are very old books, with very simple shapes where they could cut them out and glue them in their book and go around them. There's other topics. Changing the subject, the formula comes to mind, where we did things like where the x appeared in 2 places. They really found that a challenge because you have to factorize often. But things with squares and square roots, some of them could take them on. So I'm sure there's other topics that you could push up to grade 6 standard to almost like B standard, like an old intermediate class.